It's all in your head. You don't look sick. Your tests are normal. It's probably anxiety. There's nothing wrong with you. Have you heard these words from physicians, family, and friends? If you're someone who has been swirling through the revolving door of healthcare to find answers about your health, or if you know someone who is going through this experience, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to the Desperate for a Diagnosis podcast with Laura Nozicka. Oh my goodness, that's a wrap on another compelling story. Thanks for listening to the Desperate for a Diagnosis podcast. If you would like more information about today's guests or to find out more about Laura, go to desperateforadiagnosis.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow show updates and healthcare news on the podcast's Facebook page. If you would like to be a guest on the show, or if you have any questions, advice, or suggestions for our guests, please email me at lauramarie@desperateforadiagnosis.com. Please note, I am not a medical professional, nor am I affiliated with any healthcare, pharmaceutical, or device company. I am an entrepreneur and an independent market researcher focused on helping healthcare organizations better understand the patient perspective. The podcast is not meant to offer medical advice, but to merely share the stories and perspectives of podcast guests. Oh my goodness, that's a wrap on another compelling story. Thanks for listening to the Desperate for a Diagnosis podcast. If you would like more information about today's guests or to find out more about Laura, go to desperateforadiagnosis.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow show updates and healthcare news on the podcast's Facebook page. If you would like to be a guest on the show, or if you have any questions, advice, or suggestions for our guests, please email me at lauramarie@desperateforadiagnosis.com. Please note, I am not a medical professional, nor am I affiliated with any healthcare, pharmaceutical, or device company. I am an entrepreneur and an independent market researcher focused on helping healthcare organizations better understand the patient perspective. The podcast is not meant to offer medical advice, but to merely share the stories and perspectives of podcast guests. Hello, and welcome to the Desperate for a Diagnosis podcast. I am your host, Laura Nozicka, and I am really so tickled to be here with Pam Cusick because Pam, my gosh, I think it's been like a year and a half since we last talked, and you were, in fact, my third podcast guest when I started the podcast in May of 2023. Holy cow, time is going by quickly. How are you?
Great. Doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. So those of you who don't know Pam, let me tell you a little bit about Pam, and we're going to dive into a conversation that is evolving. It's not something that you stop talking about, and it is something that is so important for where research goes in the healthcare space and the pharma space, and the conversation that we need to keep having. But let me introduce Pam to you, and we'll get rolling here. Pam Cusick is an experienced research professional with more than 30 years of expertise in research, study design, implementation, and analysis. Her background in public health communications and research, coupled with her passion for patient advocacy, dovetail with Rare Patient Voices' mission and vision. She hopes to expand Rare Patient Voices panels to include all patients and caregivers who want to share their opinions and impact their disease category. As Senior Vice President of Rare Patient Voice, Pam's focus is on the continued growth and success of the company, and with an eye on client services, business development, and oversight of patient outreach, panel management, and marketing. And she does have a few hobbies and some interesting tidbits. Yeah, these were passed on to me, Pam. So you can expound on these or not if you want to. horseback riding, biking, kayaking, yoga, and reading. You have a pet, a border collie named Fergus, which I think is I love people names for animals. It cracks me up. Likes dark chocolate beaches and watching classic films. And you are a major fan of the movie The Wizard of Oz. I don't know too many people who aren't, including myself. In fact,
Mhm.
here in my office, I have some Wizard of Oz little nicky-nacky doodads things here. But, unless you're afraid of flying monkeys, I think most people
Yeah,
enjoy The Wizard of Oz.
that does get people sometimes.
It does, it does. What's your favorite scene?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. Um, I really like when, when she clicks her little heels together,
Mhm.
it just everything goes back to where she started, which always makes me I'm always looking for that kind of stuff in life. Like, gosh, let's do this adventure. This would be so much fun. But in the end, I want to be back in my own life.
Mhm.
So it just really resonates with me.
Yeah, I hear you on that. My mom and I went to this is a different Wizard of Oz story, but my mother and I went to Hawaii for a week back in January, end of January. And it's not a horrible place to have a major travel delay, no
Mhm.
doubt. But the ordeal in and of itself of canceled flights, and we almost had to stay overnight in the airport, and the airport in Kauai is the tiniest airport, probably not the tiniest, but very, very close.
Mhm.
And we almost had to stay overnight because all the rooms were
Oh, wow.
sold out on this tiny island, and luckily, friends we were with, they got a room, they had 2 queen beds, it was my friend and her mother, and luckily, we didn't have to stay in the airport, and it was a beautiful hotel, it was the Royal Sonesta on Kauai, gorgeous, I would highly
Oh,
recommend it. But even so, it really was there's no place like home moment, for sure. It was planes, trains, and automobiles, so I hear you.
wow.
Click those heels and, you're back in your happy zone, so I'm with you
Right.
on that scene. Yeah, cool. Well, it's good to be back home with you here on the podcast, Pam, and, for folks that don't know much about Rare Patient Voice, why don't you tell us a little bit about the organization and what the mission is.
Sure. So we connect patients and family caregivers with all kinds of research. So everything from market research, focus group surveys, interviews to clinical trials. So um, the interesting thing about the way that we recruit patients and find them to participate in our studies is by going to events. We'll go to the National Hemophilia Foundation conference or a National Sickle Cell conference and set up our booth and explain what kind of research they can participate in. And then we also have an internal patient advocacy team, and they're connected with over 5,000 different referral partners around the world who
Mm,
help us to identify additional patients. So it might be someone who runs a local MS group or a local cancer support group, and they help to spread the word about Rare Patient Voice, and then people join us and get offered opportunities to participate in studies. So we have about 180,000 people
mm,
so far in 1,500 conditions, and they're in 9 countries, mostly the US, but we're always expanding and trying to find them different opportunities. So, sometimes it's even when people sign up, there's not always a study for them, just based on, what products are going to market and things like that. So we do a couple of internal studies every year to keep people engaged. And then unlike regular research, we
mm.
share the results back with them. So one of the things that patients really, really want is to see what happened. Like what are the results of the clinical trial? Or, I was in a focus group. What happened to that information? And it's, usually proprietary or they're not, included at that stage. But so, we try to share back research with them so they can, I don't know, to see what their involvement produced.
That's great that you do that because, as you know, I'm a qualitative researcher as well, and I hear the same comments from patients all the time where at the end of the conversation, they say, "Well, who is this for? And will I find out what happened and what the results were?" And as you said, it's proprietary and it's blinded. The studies are typically blinded, and I always feel so badly that I have to tell them, "I'm really sorry, it's confidential, but just know that you are helping with forwarding this research, and down the road, the goal is to help folks with your condition, etcetera." But I don't have any other good answer for them, so it's
I
great that
know, it's
that
a
you
terrible
do that.
thing.
Yeah.
Guess it would if there was a way to share even the most benign information, not the, you know, which ad concept did you pick? Or, but some broad brush, it would just make them feel better because they're sharing so much personal information, very
Mhm,
private information, as you know, many times. And it can be, you feel like there's a void if you don't know what happened to the stuff that I said. Does it matter? Did it make a difference? So, yeah, I wish there was a way that sponsors and clients could say like, okay, well, this many people were interviewed and, they found whatever, just very basic information. Even that would make
mhm.
patients feel like they were more valued.
Yeah, yeah, that would be really something if that's something that we could do or encourage sponsors to do that because people really do want to help, and as a market researcher myself, I know how much they want to help because they want to tell us every single detail, which we love, but
Mhm. And
sometimes
and sometimes it's, in talking to the patients after, so outside of the research, it's very therapeutic for them
Mhm,
because a lot of times they're not sharing this information with their families because they don't want to burden them, or they've already shared the information with their families and their families are like, okay, I got it. I understand what's going on. But then they have to hold everything else inside. So when they sit with a moderator, and most moderators I know are lovely and understanding and compassionate and, good listeners, it helps them tremendously. So it's a good thing to do.
we certainly try, that's for sure, and sometimes there are some rough conversations that we as researchers do have, and, yeah, there's been a few that have cried during
Mhm.
the conversation because it is therapeutic, it is like therapy. I have had a few even say, "Wow, this is like going to therapy," and as researchers, we have an objective, so we can only go down the rabbit hole for so long, but there have been a few patients that have really gotten to me, and then I go to bed at night thinking about a few of them, and they stick with me, and so for the patients who wonder what happened to the research, I go to bed thinking about what happened to that patient.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I can imagine. It's
yeah.
Yeah, they everything they share is, the heart of their existence and the challenges they face. They're letting you know about it, and, it's a privilege.
It is. I always say, to colleagues, but I have also said this to patients who have really divulged a lot of personal experiences with me, and every health journey is personal, but some are deeply personal more than others, and I do let them know all the time that it is an honor and a privilege to have the opportunity to talk with them because we researchers, we're perfect strangers, and
Right.
and for as much as they want to help, they don't know who they're talking with.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Is there, Pam, in the travels, if you will, of rare patient voice, covering off so many different conditions and disease categories, what tend to be the ones that are hardest to find to build the panel so that sponsors and market research agencies are getting a good pool, if you will, of patients to talk with and get a good read on what their journey is really like?
Not surprising. The rarer the condition, the more challenging it is to find groups to work with, advocacy groups, support groups. Sometimes it's a condition that is linked to another condition that sometimes we're able to find, like alpha mannosidosis, I think is one that,
I've done
it's hard to
research in
find,
that. I've done that.
but
I've done that research. Yep,
excellent.
and it is super rare.
It
Yes.
is, and so
Yes.
it's, those and the challenge is, when you have a rare condition, you're very, a lot of people are very isolated, right? They don't know anyone else who has that condition, or family members don't understand it, or whatever it is. So the fact that something's so rare that there either isn't any kind of information or advocacy groups, or just they're very few, makes it even harder, to live with that condition, but also harder for researchers to find them.
Mhm.
However, our advocacy team, patient advocacy team, is really good at kind of connecting the dots and finding, you know, that one person, not, I'm gonna say influencer, I don't mean influencer like, we think of, but the person who is active in their community, and trying to either bring people together or connect. And those people become our referral partners, and then we're able to find those people who are hard to reach. It's it takes a lot of work. We've been around for since 2013. Um and built and built and built, kind of slowly, but making sure that we were, avoiding fraud, and people signing up randomly with us. We do a lot of checks to make sure that that does not happen. uh, I'm not saying it could never happen, so anyone out there, if but it's far less likely to happen, given how we identify people, where we identify them, and then how we go through checking, their IP address and their location and their disease and the medications they take. Like, all those things, it takes a lot of time on our end, but well worth it,
How
to make sure.
what's the process for that, Pam? How do you do all those checks and balances? I see you guys on LinkedIn all the time, and you all are real movers and shakers when it comes to attending all the events, but that's just your recruitment process, but then to really vet out the respondents and the patients who want to be helpful, et cetera, and I'm sure they are all 100% legit. I don't know anybody who walks around saying, "Hi, I have this condition," and,
Right.
they
Not
they really
usually, but
don't.
you would be surprised. So, going to events and connecting through advocacy and support groups, it's a little easier to, go through and do your checks and balances. So there's, like I said, we check IP addresses versus the country where they say they're coming from. We look at, the conditions they have. Have they copied the description of their condition out of Wikipedia? That's a
Wow.
red flag. There are a couple other things like that, lists of medications that are all spelled perfectly correctly. We can't even spell our own medications correctly. So, do you know what I mean? Like, they're not necessarily legit, and we will then, if we have a red flag, we'll call them and, go through a kind of a checklist of things. Most of the time, though, if they're a fraudulent person, they don't answer whatever phone number that they gave to us. So we just put them in our quarantine area and don't allow them to participate. It's, you know, I think it's a bad thing. It's a, like, bad karma, right? To say you have a medical condition that you don't, but people do, because, we believe strongly in compensating patients well. So we pay them $120 an hour for sharing their expertise, which is great. But it also inspires people who might
Mm.
be actors to want to try to, get into a study. So we have, our teams are really work hard to make sure that we don't see that fraud. And they, once you do it for a little while, you can look at patterns of, because one person will be in there trying to sign up 800 times, and they'll have, like, their email will be apple1 at Gmail, peach2 at Gmail, banana3 at, and so they're clever, but not clever enough, and
Mhm.
you can catch it.
That's fascinating. I didn't realize that because I personally don't get involved in screener design or recruitment and that is not my strength and God bless the people who do it because I I give them so much credit for doing that detailed work because there's so many aspects to a market research project, whether it's one-on-one interviews or focus groups, et cetera. And certainly when it comes to drug development, there's a lot on the line all the way around. But there's so many steps in the process that any one of them that is a misfire,
Mhm.
let's say, can really skew so much of where the study goes and where the drug goes or the audience for the drug or to really understand what the patient journey is or what the gaps are, all those things. And so from a recruitment standpoint, to not get the right person in the front door right away, it can be detrimental all the way around.
Sure. The other interesting thing is, going to these patient events that we go to, a lot of times people will, you know, ask why, like, why would anyone want me to participate in research? Like, as researchers,
Mhm.
we always think, well, everyone knows that research, but a lot of people just don't know that that their expertise is needed, that
Oh.
that's, something that they're uniquely qualified to share that information and participate in research. And they, usually I'm like, well, you're the expert on your disease. And they kind of straighten up a little bit. You're right. But it's true. And I think for us, finding the right people, like we can look all day long, but it's kind of through our partners and connections that we have and networking that we do with patient groups that we're able to find people who might not know that they can participate. uh, it's the similar to clinical trials. People just don't know that they're eligible. They don't know that they could participate. Their doctor doesn't tell them because maybe their doctor doesn't work in like a research facility, or isn't, necessarily connected. So it's a lot of it is information and how do people find out that they can participate and they can be part of something to change, aspects of their condition, whether it be a trial or, a communications piece. All of that is, something they can contribute to and make a difference.
Mhm. Pam, I think the behemoth in our virtual room here is AI.
Right?
It's almost a dirty word in some ways, I
Mhm,
feel lately because it's new, yet it's not, yet it
mhm.
has just skyrocketed so much in the last year even, I guess. I don't know. I feel like we woke up one day, talking about AI is this kind of thing that could happen or something that we just don't even expect is a real thing, but it's a real thing now and it
Mhm.
got real very quickly. How would you say AI is potentially either working with you or maybe not so much in your favor as far as recruiting patients? What are you saying?
Well, I guess on the I'll start with the negative side, the like bots trying to sign up with you. I mean, they're intelligent, when you give these things prompts and kind of can tell I can go on there and say, "Oh, I have X condition. Oh, what do I write?" But at mass scale, bots signing up for research panels and other recruiters, it, it can be hard to find. I know I saw something, I think it was today, about a pattern that somebody had recently identified in terms of the language that the AI person or whatever was using. And that was used like something like they would start every sentence with, in my experience, or in my
Mhm.
experience. whatever it was. And so each one of these responses came back with, in my experience, the rest of it was different, but the beginning was the same. And so they, quickly went in and kind of tagged all those things as potential fraud. And I'm sure they're, investigating who did it, but it's probably pretty likely that it was, somebody who was trying to, get a survey completed at scale. Because, if you think about it, let's say it's $10 per survey, right? The patient is getting $10 even, or the person. It doesn't necessarily have to be healthcare related, but one person doing it gets $10, but 5,000 people doing it could be a significant amount of money for somebody. And so, to go in and train, one of these systems to answer questions for you, it's kind of like the upgraded version of a click form, right? Are you familiar with click forms?
I'm not, no.
So this was a number of years ago. It's grown since then, but so what I saw on this, was a police activity, but it was like a trailer, long trailer, and along the sides were all these iPads, and there was one person answering survey questions, and these hundreds of iPads were, filling out the surveys. Basically, it was I don't remember exactly how it was connected, but what they were trying to do is, earn that honorarium by, doing these whatever hundreds of surveys, which in some countries, that $5, $10 a survey times 100 is huge money. So I think that the AI respondent is that's one, element that is, especially worrisome, right? The other thing on the on the interesting side, and I'm all for real respondents, so don't get me wrong.
Mhm.
There are companies out there creating, like synthetic respondents, synthetic patients, digital twins and things like that, which are based on the actual people who have that condition. And, how you would use that is another question, right? So when you're looking to do, a quant study where, um, patients with achondroplasia, as an example, we don't have a lot. We have a decent sized community, but not everyone wants to participate in market research for a variety of reasons in that, who have that condition. So would it be valuable to use synthetic patients who were built on the, working with real patients in order to get your sample that was, statistically significant? I mean, I don't know enough about it to know that you trust it or you don't trust it. I just know there's a lot out there. And I was at a presentation last year in the UK where it was one of our clients had done a comparison of, real patients with this condition and AI patients being asked the same questions, and their responses were very similar.
Mm.
I mean,
Wow.
you couldn't like I guessed correctly most of the time, but a couple times I couldn't tell which one was, synthetic. So I just think there are a lot of, for those of us who, are like you're worried about fraud and now you have these synthetic patients, is there going to be a difference? Are they going to answer things the same way? So, the safest bet is to actually go to the real people. But I think it's almost something that we can't avoid. So we have to know about it and figure out if it is something we want to work with or utilize in some fashion, that we do it strategically, that we're cognizant of the fact that, these are real patients who experience pain and, other symptoms that a AI created patient isn't going to feel. It's not going to have those like, I woke up in the night with a night sweats. You might, they might anecdotally know that, but there are other pieces to it that they may not be able to elaborate on. And I think that could be a gap.
Yeah, 100%. And who knows? Pam, we could be podcast avatars right now and people don't even know it.
It's a it's a thing.
It's a thing. That's right. But rest assured, people, Pam and I are the real deal. Let's
The
just
real deal.
put that out there. We prefer the real deal here to have this conversation, and it is an important conversation to have because um certainly where does the human part of market research happen? Because we hear all the time about how healthcare organizations keep the patient in mind, human centered this, and now we're talking about these bot AI synthetic whatevers, and where does that human centeredness really happen then, if that's really what we're looking at? And I know they've already talked about synthetic moderators, like, someone has programmed that already.
I know. It's
But
yeah, it's moving so fast, it's hard to really know what, which which direction it will go. I mean, I feel like there's always going to be a need for real patients, who experience that medical condition because in some cases there are just so few of them. You can't create an army of synthetic patients in some of these areas, and I don't know that you'd have that you could get that validation. But I'm sure things will continue to roll on and um, it's just good to be aware of what's out there and what you're working with, right? So if you are working with live patients, real patients, and some subset of synthetic patients, I'd want to see that in my report because, show me do their responses differ at all, or maybe they differ significantly. But it would be important to know that so you know you're making the right decisions. It's the same way I feel about fraud and research. So if you're basing your decisions. So let's say you have a huge MS study and you're basing your decisions about a direction for an ad campaign or something like that on their responses, but a third of them are fake, you're not going to really be reaching the proper audience. So, um, it's a similar feel, like go to the real deal.
agreed, 100%. And it just seems like one big experiment right now, honestly. Is AI here to stay? Probably. In what capacity? I don't know that we're 100% sure yet where it will go.
Yeah, I think it is a useful tool, but I would not use it to do everything for me.
Mhm. Yep, yep. And we keep hearing things about the new disease, if you will, of loneliness because there is this synthetic interaction just with AI and oh, I don't have an Alexa, so I could say that. And then that other lady on on your iPhone.
Yeah, don't
I
say her
have
name.
one, so I don't
Just
wanna
here
say
she'll come.
yeah, I don't wanna say her name. I always say you're
No.
not alone if you have, ChatGPT, Alexa, and the lady on your iPhone. But it's a terrible thing. So just, downstream of where AI is going, there's curses and silver linings to everything, and
Absolutely.
I think it's yet to be seen where this will all go. Pam, Rare Patient Voice conducted a couple of really interesting studies on behalf of market researchers and in one arm of your research and then from a clinical trial standpoint. And I'd love it if you can talk a little bit about what you learned from that research and what you can recommend or suggest to sponsors or market researchers of things to look out for and maybe things that could strengthen um, research in terms of recruiting, et cetera.
Sure. So the two studies that we did, one was about communication preferences in clinical trials, and that was conducted in the U.S. with 1,147 patients and family caregivers. The other one was preferences in healthcare research participation, which was more about market research, And that was conducted in the UK with 369 patients and family caregivers. Um, the the studies roughly, I mean, obviously some things are different between clinical trials and market research, but some of the whys, like why do people participate in research, whether it's a trial or in market research, they do it because they want to help others, they want to advance research in their disease area, but they also do it, some of them, because they're going to be compensated for their time. Not necessarily because they're doing it only because they're being paid, but because they feel like I'm giving you something valuable, it's nice to be compensated. In and those things kind of paralleled each other in, the results that we had from clinical trials and market research. The difference in market research is one of the things that people said that they were excited about was being able to share their experiences and their opinions. Which is what we talked about at the beginning, how important it is to, for them and how it can be very therapeutic. Those were like, so almost 3/4 of people said that they did it because it was an opportunity to share their experiences.
Mhm.
So, and that was above being compensated, a sense of community or anything like that. It really was that, they had an opportunity to share their expertise or their experience. And I think that's really important, especially, if you look at the other side, like the clinical trial side of things, they're coming in to fill a clinical trial. You have to go out to a massive number of people. And this funnel comes down to, a very few people who qualify, but their experiences are probably not the same as they would have when they're going to a market research, study because it's, based on their clinical, outcomes and, the blood work that they get or whatever it is that's, what that helps to screen them in. And I think that, maybe some of that, say, warm and fuzzy feeling that you get to share your experience, maybe bring that over into the clinical trial side would help, to encourage people. But, some of the things that that encourage people to into trials is similar to, some of the things that encourage people to do market research. Things like, support, detailed information, reimbursement. Those things are, a little bit different for clinical trials because you're often, flying across the country and, you have to go to a site for several days and so on. Um, but for market research, the top thing that they mentioned was making it easy. And that's similar to, clinical trials. People want flexibility, make participating in this study easy. And that's where people could in market research, where people could participate easily, do things online. Um, you know, Again, if it was whether it was a focus group or a survey, they could do it from the comfort of their own home. That all made it better for them. And
Mhm.
that would what they felt would be, encourage them to participate in a study. Um,
Yep, it's rough, I would think, for especially for certain types of patients, depending on what their symptoms are or where they are in their disease journey, and I've done market research with patients in the middle of the city in Chicago, and I'm not saying that patients don't come from the city or don't live in the city, of
mhm,
course, but it's hard to get around, and if maybe public transportation is your only way, it can be cumbersome, or paying for parking if you drive, things like that, and some days I just think, "Oh, what's the easier way?" And even though COVID was what it was, we certainly figured out the workarounds to still
right,
get
yeah.
people participating, and are you seeing from your standpoint, Pam, that more patients are willing to participate because it has been made easier?
Well, I think definitely. I mean,
Mhm.
it's if they can do something from the comfort of their own home as opposed to going into Chicago or Baltimore or wherever, it just makes it easier for them, whether or not they have like an accessibility issue or a disability that makes it hard to take public transportation or drive a car. It's there are other factors that, sometimes people don't consider. They have kids, they have, I mean, other pieces of the puzzle. And if we can make it easy for them to do from their homes, we may find that more people want to participate.
Yeah. What are some of the other than online capabilities, what are some of the things that maybe sponsors or research agencies are figuring out and how to encourage more participation?
Um, well, from a sometimes it's getting over the barriers, right? So, patients want to make sure that their information is private and secure. So that was a top concern on both, clinical trials and market research to make sure that, the time commitment is reasonable. If you tell me that this, survey is going to take me half an hour, but it actually takes me an hour and a half, that's going to make me, unhappy and I'll probably not want to participate again.
Mhm.
With clinical trials, they want to know you know, how many visits am I going to have to take? How long am I going to need to be there? Because unless it's a decentralized trial, they often have to go to this study site in order to, have the work done that they need. And it can be daunting. So, giving them, kind of the basic information up front about what the time commitment is really, really helpful.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, and I always say too that we the experience of market market research in particular, but I actually worked in an agency that specialized in patient recruitment for clinical trials.
mhm.
I did that for a year. That was actually my foray into pharma.
Oh,
Even though I had worked in a lot of the healthcare systems here in Chicago in a marketing capacity, and I had worked for a couple ad agencies, but somehow this recruitment agency found me, and I thought, What is this uh, job recruiter smoking?"
right. Mhm.
Because I had never worked in patient recruitment or pharma or anything, but boy, did I learn a lot. But it really is about the experience has to be stellar because we need, whether it's patients or, of course, we interview physicians and clinicians of all kinds of as well. But we need, from a research supplier perspective, we need to make sure that they are having a good experience in the conversation, in the recruitment process, because we need them to want to participate and continue to participate. I think that's really important as well.
Right, exactly. Especially at least for us in some of those rare conditions, really can't afford to them to have a bad experience because
Mhm.
there's so few in some of these, these disease areas. You'd want to make it good for them anyway, but for the end clients who, really need that information, if we don't do our job and make it a good experience, we may not have access to those people anymore. And, you know, who would blame them, right?
Right.
They're
And
doing they're doing us a favor by giving us letting us into their lives and giving us all of this information to help make decisions about a drug, about a device, that you might as well make it as easy as you can.
because it isn't just a one and done,
Mhm.
especially with a rare disease when it's a wider, more chronic or just, just a disease that more people have, of course. Um, like, diabetes, let's say. There's a bigger pool, of course, but certainly patients who unfortunately have a rare disease, we need them even more more frequently to understand their journeys and where they are, and even things like I've done some research where I didn't design the research, but I was handed the methodology to execute on from a moderating
Mhm.
standpoint, and I get what I get. And sometimes these discussion guides are just so packed, and I know that one, of course, from a budget standpoint, we want to squeeze out everything we can from one interview, but we're also curious though about our patients, that we need to understand so much from them, and there's only so much time. But if they're also in a, let's say, kind of semi-compromised state, research can be exhausting. I've worked on studies, or I conducted research where maybe it was a concept test for
Mhm.
advertising, and there were just so many, and some patients, depending on their conditions, they have cognitive issues or they have vision problems, and we're making things very tiny on the screen for them, or we're just expecting them to process what we're showing them so quickly. And I know that sometimes there are clients who have gotten a little agitated because the interview took longer than they would have
Right.
liked or what has been scoped. But we can't expect patients, again, depending on their conditions, to process as quickly as we would like them to, or to read things fast enough and then have give us this, quick answer, and deduce what they think something means, and pick a word that they prefer
Describes it,
more.
right,
What
yeah.
exactly? There's so much to it. So I think that that fatigue within an interview, are things too that we have to be careful of as researchers, to make sure that the experience isn't daunting to where they say, "I am never doing that again."
I think to that same point, one thing that's could be very helpful is asking up front if people need any accommodations
Mhm.
to complete the research, because you might be doing a diabetes study, but that patient might also have dyslexia and they need extra
Mhm.
time to read. Or they have, a cognitive delay due to another factor. And if you know that up front, you, like, as the moderator, can say, well, okay, this person's going to need extra time. Or if you're in a focus group and that one person doesn't seem to be responding, it's not necessarily that they don't want to, but they need a little more time to tick.
Mhm.
So, you know, I don't think it isn't usually something that's asked up front in a screener, but it could be or should be. And, it might help patients to feel more comfortable, but researchers to get what they're looking for. Because I know when you're going through your discussion guide and it's coming up on 2 hours and you're like, I gotta rush through these things. But if you
Mhm.
knew ahead of time that you were gonna need extra time because this person would take longer to read or process, they might have a processing issue,
Right.
that, you could adapt to that. You
Yeah.
know, you would know that, and you could brief your client ahead of time, like, "This is probably gonna take longer," and
Yeah.
then that takes the stress out of it.
Totally agree. Yes, and from a moderator
For all of
standpoint,
us, right?
and anything to take the stress out of the heartburn,
Right.
sometimes that happens from research. Um, Pam, what other exciting things is Rare Patient Voice working on, or what are some of the key goals for 2025, as we're, God, a quarter of the way through the year
Right.
already?
Well, I think, our goal is always to, kind of twofold. We wanna to identify patients, individuals, people who wanna participate in research. We have expanded to a few other countries and would like to grow those areas. I mean, we seem to, be very communicative and expressive in the US, and some other countries are a little reticent to, sign up and share about their medical conditions, and kind of building you know, that trust with, patient groups, organizations, going to events and making sure they know that we're not, a scam or a gimmick of any kind, that we're actually trying to actually help them to share their voice and their experience is a good thing. And so we are always building in that area, kind of building trust, building, our patient community. And then on the other side, it's really going to find those organizations who either don't know that they need to hear the patient voice or aren't hearing it enough. So, identifying organizations, a lot of times we'll have like people who build apps, techie people. They're like, we built this thing for patients. They're going to love it. And I'd say, well, did you get patient input before you decided? Oh, no, no. Our people know what patients want. Well, that's not really true. You may have really, really smart people on your team, but you need to talk to the patients first to see, is what you're thinking something that they want, or if not, maybe it can be adapted in some way to something that they do want or would use. Um, but, there are other things like a lot of our patients have either a visible or an invisible disability. And, there are all kinds of things being developed. I mean, think about everything you use during a day, like your clothing, your toothbrush, your hairbrush, makeup, all those things, there are adaptive components. Like if you have fine motor skill issues, maybe you can't really hold a makeup brush well. So there have been developed some that were better for people with fine motor skill issues. Uh, so finding those companies, which is really this is kind of a fun part, finding those companies or those researchers who really need the patients but don't know where to find them.
Mhm.
And we hear that a lot. Every conference, there's at least one person who's like, "I didn't know there was a place that you could go and just recruit patients. Here we are." But everyone can't know everything, right? It's a big world out there. And so we keep, sharing the information and trying to get out there and let people know about us. But there's inevitably, or somebody who will say, "Oh, I didn't know you had caregivers too." Or, "Oh, you can recruit for clinical trials." The message is out there in the universe, but people often do what they like. When I was a moderator, I would go to the facilities and I would give them my specs and they would recruit. And I didn't know that, there wasn't an organization like Rare Patient Voice at the time, but that, having a group that you can go to directly to help you to source the people that you need to talk to it's a really useful tool. So it's just we'll continue banging the drum and getting the word out and letting people know that we're here and the patients want to talk to you.
Well, like I said, you guys are movers and shakers 100%. Where you're this week you're at this conference and you're at this patient conference. I mean, just the advocacy for advocacy that you guys do is pretty amazing. Um, Pam, have you seen any trends in methodologies that have maybe been producing more robust insights for agencies? And, I certainly don't mean those synthetic,
Not the
respondents, but
synthetic people.
the real
Um,
people.
well, we don't oftentimes hear, just like the
Mm.
patients don't hear the research, neither do we. We are seeing more ethnographies come back into play, which
Okay.
kind of were gone during
Yep.
COVID. Online communities where people can kind of over the course of a couple weeks talk about, you know, their disease area or a new drug that's coming out, those sorts of things. I mean, those aren't new. People have been doing those for a while, but um, I don't it's hard for me to say whether, any of this has produced something different or new because they don't share that with us.
Mm. That would be so great for you to know, just to get a read on an understanding of maybe there is a subset of patients who are more apt to, "Oh, I'd love to do an online diary because I don't mind. I'm a better communicator when I write my thoughts and my feelings versus, no, I want to be one-on-one with someone speaking." That could be a whole nother criteria in terms of how people prefer to talk about their.
Share, right?
Yeah.
We do have some, patients who have, who let us know internally that they don't wanna be they don't wanna do, a face-to-face research for,
Okay.
whatever their personal reasons are, or, they just wanna receive survey opportunities or what have you. So, those are and again, if that's what they want, that's what we'll, put into their profile. We're not gonna question them on but I think it's, a lot of times it is maybe they're not comfortable with Zoom, so they don't wanna do a Zoom interview
Mm-mm.
um, or like I said, travel to a focus group facility. But, we try to take that into account. It's, so much of this is about what is easy and makes sense for the patient. So, they wanna know, regardless of the methodology, they wanna know sort of the purpose and the how long is it gonna take? What are the goals of this study? I mean, if we can provide some of that information up front, it makes them much more likely to wanna be involved because they're not showing up blind like, "Oh, you're coming in because you have diabetes." We're trying to identify new tools for patients with diabetes. That's the goal of the study. Makes it maybe a little bit better for them,
Mhm.
or makes them more encouraged to, to participate. Um, sometimes there are those cost issues. You mentioned like getting, from around Chicago, maybe you have to park your car and it's $28, for the hour.
I
Um,
wish. I wish that's all it was, Pam. Have you been here
right, around
lately?
$58.
Have you been
Um,
here lately? Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
no, no, or I didn't have a car. I was
Yeah.
like Ubered.
Uh-huh, uh-huh, yep.
But I think, those things that we may take for granted, patients can't always afford to pay $50 for parking. And if you're
Mhm.
compensating them $50, it's hard to make that decision to come. So if there are out of pocket costs that, the end client can cover for the patient, it might encourage more participation.
Yep.
And that could be clinical trials as well as, as market research, because as we know, we're saying, it can be expensive or difficult to get around. I know with clinical trials, there are these concierge services that help to organize everything for the patient so that they can get to the site, not be stressed out.
Mhm.
But in market research, we don't do anything like that.
Mhm.
We're very well, I shouldn't say that a rare patient voice, we do something like that. We have a lovely woman, Christina, on our team who is a scheduler, and she was just telling me a story about something, but this came out. I didn't know that she did this. She was on the phone with a respondent in Philadelphia who was trying to find the facility and find parking. So she got on a map on Google Maps and figured out where the person was and directed them to a parking garage.
Aw,
That's pretty good, but
that's
I don't know that that always happens,
mhm.
but I'm sure it made a difference for that patient and any other patients that she does that with.
Yeah, yeah, again, it's those little details that
Yeah.
make people feel one way or another about what we're all trying to try to accomplish. Pam, is there anything that you would recommend to your, market research partners as far as what's important to maybe continue to build the relationship and what would be more, I guess, beneficial in terms of collaborating from the standpoint of recruiting patients, you know, s- getting involved in, I'm making this up, like screener development,
Mhm.
or maybe you do get involved in those things, but kind of on the wish list, if you could do anything to make that relationship stronger with the agencies in particular, what would that look like for you? What would be ideal?
I think probably tops would be making it a meaningful experience for the patient. You know, a lot of times in market research, we people talk about sample, right?
Mm.
Push sample. But these are people who are, they're suffering greatly in many cases, things that you and I don't even know anything about.
Mhm.
Um, and they have, they're giving a lot, even if we're paying them, whatever we're compensating them. They're still giving more of themselves than I think we give them credit for. And I think making it a meaningful experience, if you can give them any results, even like I said, even like the top level, like, "Oh, we had 25 people participate and they really, you know, thought this, and this." Even it's not trade secrets, something where they feel like, "Hey, look, I was valued." I have one story about that. One of the people who works with us, he, um, has MS, and he always tells this story about how he participated in a focus group, and he is absolutely sure that I think it's called a cane that they redesigned it based on his feedback.
Oh,
It was
wow.
very meaningful. I mean, he may have been one of 20 people who had said that, but he could see that result in
Yeah.
the redesign of that product, and I think that is very valuable. So making it meaningful to the patient, making it convenient. You know, a lot of times we'll hear, "Well, the patient didn't show up," or, they but build extra time into the things that you're doing because patients get sick.
Yep.
If they're a caregiver, they may have to take their child to the hospital, they have a flare, something happens, and, you know if you're recruiting it for a specific condition, know what those kind of symptoms and side things that can go on because you just don't know. And you can't be, you can't, sometimes a regimented schedule just doesn't fit, right? So being flexible and being, kind of maybe build a little extra time into your recruiting schedule, build a little extra time into your, the time that you're conducting the research,
Mhm.
just so you give those patients a little bit of flexibility and grace because they're going through a lot.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
keeping
It's
them
so
keeping
true.
them engaged, keeping them informed, whether that's they've scheduled an interview for 2 weeks from now and just giving them an update. Oh yeah, we're looking forward to our interview with you, whatever it is because they, you know, like I said, they're giving you a lot of very personal information, but they also need to know that you actually care.
Mhm.
Um,
Yep.
and I think, above all, not treating them like they're just a number.
Well,
They're important.
and that's so much of what they'll talk about, and really a lot of the premise of my podcast is this revolving door of healthcare that people with chronic conditions, have. It's this revolving door of doctor's visits, etcetera, and they do. They say they feel like they are just a number, and so when we're out here trying to be seemingly compassionate and care about our patients and how they do contribute so much to where healthcare is going and where drug development goes and that they are at the heart of what we're doing. We have to prove that. And the healthcare system won't always contribute to that for us in a good way. So if we have to do other things to make sure that patients feel valued and that we do believe in what they are bringing forth in terms of sharing their experiences will actually make an impact and that we appreciate that down the road. So all good things, Pam. Any other final thoughts or quotes from the Wizard of Oz or anything like that that you you'd like to share?
Oh boy, I don't know. No, I don't. I don't think so. I think the "No Place Like Home" just is great. Actually, here's fun fact.
Mhm.
So back 30, 25, whatever years ago, Wes and I both worked at a pharma market research company, and our group, we came for Halloween as the Wizard of Oz, and I was
Oh,
doing, and I had a little at the time a Kieran Terrier. His name was Duncan, but his name is his. He acted as Toto, and Wes was, I think he was the Scarecrow. But yeah, there's a fun fact,
that is fun, and you were Dorothy,
and I was
I
Dorothy.
yeah, if I got that. I actually so of course I'm in my home office, obviously, and on my door, I have a sign that says, "Don't make me get the flying monkeys."
Yeah, I love
Uh,
that.
yeah, so that's what's on my office door all year long, except at Christmas, I'll put up a nice happy wreath versus this kind of surly, "Don't make me get the flying monkeys," but there are days I feel like that. But today is not one of them because this has been a lovely conversation, Pam. Thank you so much for being with me today. And how can folks learn about uh, Rare Patient Voice and how to get involved in the database and get involved in either market research or clinical trials to be considered eligible? How does
Sure.
that work?
You can go to rarepatientvoice.com and there's a sign up page which has a lot of information about what kind of research you might participate in and how to sign up. You can sign up there. There also is a whole other tab for researchers, which includes, many of the conditions that we have in our community, and then our pricing is on there, and how you can get a proposal from us. So our one website, meets everybody's needs.
Awesome. Well, again, you guys, you do so much and so many good things. I can't say enough about all of you and what you do, and Wes is awesome also, and obviously, folks, I know Pam for a little while now, so being in the same industry, but Pam, thanks so much for coming back. I hope you'll come back again, and maybe we'll have more robust conversation on the AI front, or who knows? The industry's
Mhm.
changing, and who knows what the next thing will be. So, thank you so much for being with me today.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Well, this is Laura Nozicka, your host of the Desperate for a Diagnosis podcast. Stay well and keep pushing for answers. Oh my goodness, that's a wrap on another compelling story. Thanks for listening to the Desperate for a Diagnosis podcast. If you would like more information about today's guests or to find out more about Laura, go to desperateforadiagnosis.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow show updates and healthcare news on the podcast's Facebook page. If you would like to be a guest on the show, or if you have any questions, advice, or suggestions for our guests, please email me at lauramarie@desperateforadiagnosis.com. Please note, I am not a medical professional, nor am I affiliated with any healthcare, pharmaceutical, or device company. I am an entrepreneur and an independent market researcher focused on helping healthcare organizations better understand the patient perspective. The podcast is not meant to offer medical advice, but to merely share the stories and perspectives of podcast guests.